Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah ta'ala, we're about to begin. Keep your microphones on mute for the recording purposes. Inshallah, as soon as it changes to the hour, so that's in 2 minutes, we will begin. Assalamu alaikum. Make sure you keep your devices on mute. Okay, inshallah ta'ala, we are about to begin. I'm just waiting for a brother to sit down. We'll just give him a minute, inshallah. All right, we're going to go ahead and begin. Bi-iznillahi ta'ala. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد. We are beginning a 3-day course on the history of Shafi'i Fiqh. But in order to start and understand the beginning of Shafi'i Fiqh, you need to also understand Fiqh and the history of its development. In order to understand this, you need to understand the environment, the culture, and the influences of the early Muslims. As we know, Islam started in Arabia. Arabia was greatly influenced by two major nations. You had the Persians in the northeast and the Romans in the north and in the west, and slightly, you could say, the northwest. This means that there will be a lot of culture impact from these nations upon the Muslims. These nations come with their own laws, rules, and traditions, things that we actually see present when studying the history, the seerah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and things that he encountered or Islam addressed. There were actually traditions and habits picked up from other nations for the most part. There was a minor selected issues that were from locally inherited traditions and made up ideologies. However, most of the influence was actually foreign. In this early stage, we see tashri' taking place. Tashri'a is the legal system that we as Muslims follow. I see a few of our brothers are just making it in. I want to welcome everyone to today's class. And just a reminder, we're going over the history of fiqh until we get to Imam Shafi'i, and then we'll branch off and continue our journey through the history of Shafi'i fiqh. But back to what we were saying, we were speaking about the influences upon the average person in the region at the time of early Islam. When Islam came, it came with laws. These laws came to us in different forms, in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran being a book of guidance and a book of law actually addresses a lot of different customs and culture habits that were present in the region, along with addressing a lot of different scientific, academic, linguistical issues and problems as well. In addition, it also addressed other religions and their beliefs and legal systems, whether approving or rejecting. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being the creator of man, knows what man needs in order for man to become better. And of course, when we say man, we mean human, male and female. So when the Quran was revealed, it was revealed in segments per the need of the people. Even certain laws, due to their importance or severe impact, comes in small segments in order to prepare you for the final legal verdict. Scholars discuss, well, why? Why wasn't it all just sent in one part? Some argued that this was great support for the Prophet ﷺ, so he does not feel alone. So when things were to happen, he receives the message. Others said this was all part of the challenge of the Quran itself. But when we look at it from the fiqh perspective, we see something else. We see training. We see preparation. For me to tell you to do something is hard. But if I ease you into the act, it becomes easy. And it's similar to the statement that we know in English, the famous statement that says what? Give a fishing rod, not a fish. And it's the same thing with these verses that when were revealed, they're revealed in a way to prepare you for that which is to come, whether it's that actual law changing or something else going to be revealed later on. It's this preparation along with the events taking place and the surroundings and the culture impact from all of these people becoming Muslim and gathering into one area. So much comes in with that. Imagine if you are, for example, an Arab moving to the West for the first time. The culture shock is enormous. And if you have children, it is so hard to control them and keep them away from these other traditions and concepts and cultures that impact and influence every part of their existence. Islam and how Islam came, it recognized these issues and came in a way to address these very issues. This is why Islam is the religion of mercy. Now, we could get into the details of the science that's usually called in schools and universities around the world, Tarikh al-Tashri', but we're not going to do that. We're going to move on to the next stage, the next phase in the history of fiqh, and that is the age of the Sahaba, Ridwanullahi alayhim. Now, I could speak about the Sunnah, but the Sunnah comes, in the most part, to explain the Quran or to speak in detail on matters that the Quran was more generalized in, etc. So you understand its position. But in fiqh, we don't look at direct statements. We know we have to pray dhuhr. That's not fiqh. That's a fact. Then where's the fiqh? It's the timing. It's the how. It's the maintenance. It's the calling for. It's when do I miss it? When did I actually fulfill it like I was supposed to? In other words, what we're more focused on is the human, aside from the Prophet, interaction with the Islamic legal system. This is where fiqh actually begins. And a lot of people assume or have this assumption that this happened way after the time of the Prophet. But this is a misconception. This actually happened during the lifetime of the Prophet. For we see the Sahaba themselves doing Ijtihad, meaning they are analyzing the Quran that they have received so far, the Sunnah that they have learned thus far, and they're coming to a conclusion on certain issues that are being presented to them. Well, why are they doing this? The Prophet is available. Yes, but there wasn't Zoom back then, right? There wasn't Zoom, right? There wasn't WhatsApp or Telegram or any of these systems. So in order to solve the problem, you'll either have to wait for a few months to get to where the Prophet is if you're traveling, or you won't answer at all. We see that the Sahaba, they actually answered. Now there's a famous hadith, and I know there are arguments on the validity of the hadith, but for the most part, the scholars accept it as an acceptable narration. And it says this: when the Prophet ﷺ sent Mu'adh to Yemen, and FYI, Mu'adh didn't go to Yemen to a Christian society. There's another misconception there. I think this is a good opportunity to clear that up. First, I want to welcome all the brothers that just made it in. Hayyakumullah jami'an. We're going over the history of fiqh. We know the famous hadith, O Mu'adh, you're coming to the people of the book. So the first thing that you should call them to is what? That they say La ilaha illallah. If they do so, tell them that Allah has ordered them to pray. If they do so, tell them that Allah tell them that they have to fast. If they do so, tell them that Allah has obligated them to pay zakah. There's a backstory, right? A lot of people are not aware of. You see, he wasn't going to preach to Christians. A lot of people will say, well, wait a minute, but the hadith says, yes, let me give you the backstory so you just understand what happened. The Prophet ﷺ sent Khalid ibn al-Walid to either convince the Yemeni people to become Muslim or join an alliance or go to war. When Khalid came to them, they decided to go to war. And Khalid did not win, nor did they win. It was a stalemate. They didn't make any advancements on either side. So the Prophet ﷺ called Khalid back and he sent Ali ibn Abi Talib. And there was a battle. But Ali won. Ali came back to the Prophet ﷺ and said, we won. He said, go back and speak with them. Don't conquer them. That's never the point in Islam. The point is for people to come to Islam. That's the point. He goes back and he starts having meetings with them, and they all start becoming Muslim. They were Christian. They're all becoming Muslim. So then the Prophet ﷺ told Ali, you come back, I'm going to send other people. There's Sahaba with Ali ibn Abi Talib. Al-Bara ibn Azib says, I was with Ali. And when Ali went back the second time, I stayed behind. The Prophet ﷺ chooses Mu'adh from his students, Mu'adh ibn Jabal. He tells him, I'm sending you to Yemen, who are a people of Ahlul Kitab. Meaning, when you put it into its historical context, they were from Ahlul Kitab. They're coming to Islam now. So the focus would be now is teach them La ilaha illallah, because Christians are people that, while they do say La ilaha illallah, they say La ilaha illallah. Some of them say that God might be Jesus. Others say, no, Jesus is his son, etc., and many dominations and many different groups of Christianity. So Mu'adh was actually going as a teacher and an educator, not alone, by the way. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari was going with him. And they were going to split the work. In one of the hadith, an athar is something narrated that's not from the Prophet, it'll be from the Sahaba or the Tabi'een and so on. In one of these hadith, it says, Mu'adh, what are you going to do when a case is being presented to you? And speaking about a case, inshallah ta'ala, maybe in a week or two, bi'idhnillah, we're going to be announcing a 3 to 4 day course on qada. That is the legal procedures in Shafi'i Fiqh. The idea of the course is to first and foremost understand when you're liable during an accusation and how to solve problems between brothers and sisters when there's accusations being passed back and forth. What is required from each side when there is a dispute? How is this presented? How is it handled? And how do we address the issue after it is the case? And remember, when you're put into such positions, since we are students of knowledge, this is the norm, then we have to remember that there is a legal code we must maintain. It's not, I think what's better. No, it's what the legal code tells you what you can and cannot do. Okay? Now, so the Prophet ﷺ says to Mu'adh, what will you do when a case is presented to you? He said, I will follow what's in Kitabillah. So the Prophet says to him, what if you don't find it in Kitabullah? He says, then I will solve it by what is in the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, what if you cannot be found in the Sunnah? He said, then I'll use the best of my judgment. The Prophet ﷺ says, Alhamdulillah alladhi waffaqa Rasulullah ila ma yurdi Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah that the messenger of Rasulullah is doing what pleases the messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So here what we have is an incident of Ijtihad. But is it the only one? No. We have the most famous incident mentioned in almost every book of fiqh and every book of usul fiqh ever written, and that is the Prophet ﷺ tells the Sahaba, only pray Asr in Bani Qurayza. Halfway there, Asr comes in. They split into two. One group says we're going to stop and pray, and the other one says we're going to rush and pray there in the time. The Prophet ﷺ, what does he say? You are both correct. But pause for a moment. Now we know the story. We've heard the story over and over and over and over again. What's the point? The point is there was two different systems of usul that were in practice here. The first one was one group stuck to what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said verbatim, meaning they looked at the alfaz, the words, while the other group looked at the meaning behind the words, what was meant, what was intended by it, how else can we understand that command. The Prophet ﷺ approves both opinions. This right here tells us that Islam does indeed recognize multiple systems in understanding, and at times might even accept multiple forms of understanding. One might say, well, this is odd. If this is a religion from God, then it should only have one meaning. On the contrary, the fact that it's from God and it can bear more than one understanding and they all be allowed and accepted is a miracle within itself. Don't forget, people before us were ordered to slaughter a cow. When they said, what do you mean? It said, a cow. What do you mean? A cow that you're not using. Well, what do you mean? A yellow cow. When you look at their scenario, analyze it correctly, think about it for a moment. Slaughter a cow. If they slaughtered any cow, it would have sufficed the command. When they dug into the details, now they can only slaughter one type of cow and nothing else. One of the hardest breeds to stumble upon, hardest breeds to maintain and nurture, and now they're stuck. Now, excuse me. Now, actual ahkam could lead this way until you get to a point where you only have one option, and whoever differs from that option automatically departs from the path of that religion. That's what happens when you start nitpicking at laws. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Da'uni ma taraktukum." Leave me alone. Don't ask me more. You get your command, fulfill it, and be quiet. Now, before moving forward, there's an important point that we must address. A lot of people say, people of fiqh are taking matters too far. The religion is greater than all of these details and rules and conditions. This makes no sense. This goes beyond the mercy of Allah. Well, yes, we do recognize that there is a bigger picture, without a doubt. But we also recognize that a man walked into the masjid who had just made wudu and forgot a little part on the back of his ankle that was dry. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, go and make wudu, you have not made wudu. Here, after speaking of the mercy, and now looking at the detail, we recognize something. Islam is not only a religion of mercy, but it is also a religion of complete and total balance and harmony. The bigger picture with the little picture. The hardships with the ease. Fear and hope. Al-khawf wal-raja. It's all together. Islam is not a religion of fear and excessive nerve-wracking and worrying, nor is it complete and unconditional love. No, it's a perfect balance. So were all the other religions. It was their followers, the adherents, that twisted and turned things. This is why approaching a legal system correctly is important, so we don't fall into the mistakes of the previous nations. They did not have a legal system. Their legal system is whatever they felt like they wanted to do, they did. That's the difference. And the Sahaba recognized this. Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he was in Yemen, 3 people came to him. This is during one of his trips. We mentioned 2 already, right? In one of them, 3 people came to him. Each one of them was saying, it's my son. This is my son. Kalam Jameel. So he asked each one of them, do you want this person to be your father? Or is this, he asked 2 of them, do you want that third one to be the father? And each one said no about the other. So then he said, you all 3 are the father, but you are in dispute with one another. So let's pull straws. Now you might say, this is weird. Why would he say this? So they pulled straws and it came for 1. Okay. Then he said to them, Now that person who's now, per the straws, the father, he needs to pay 2/3 blood money to each of the other individuals. So they said to him, what are you talking about? Like, what is this? This is nonsense. What are you saying? So he tells the story, and some say it was al-Bara ibn Azib who told the story to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Kalam Jameel. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam laughed. And no, this verdict was not upheld. No. But what is the point? The point here is that Ali ibn Abi Talib utilized the system that was present in other ahkam. Now, while you might be wondering, why did he tell that one individual to pay blood money to the other two individuals, was because he said he ruined the rights upon that child for the other two individuals. So therefore, since he ruined the rights, he owed liability, which would be blood money, diya. Now, the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell him that the process was wrong. Yes, he said that maybe this wasn't for this scenario, this situation. But again, what we have here is a training process that we can easily start to see in the lives of the Sahaba. Another famous issue is the issue we know as Az-Zabiyya. It was also with Ali ibn Abi Talib. And what happened was, people brought an animal to a lion to eat. Kalam Jameel. Tamam. Then they started to pull that animal away from the lion. Then the people started to fight with the lion. Okay. Then the lion killed all 4 people involved. Okay. This was brought to Ali ibn Abi Talib. And Ali ibn Abi Talib, again, being in this position where he has to make ijtihad because, well, let's face it, there's no ayah or hadith that says if people fight with a lion, who owes the blood money. But Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu actually responded, and he said, the first person gets 1/4 of blood money. Why did he say this? He said this because he was one of the 4. Kalam Jameel. But why would he get 1/4 of the blood money? Because while he was being attacked by the lion, possibly how they were presenting it, got suffocated over the other 3. He said then the second individual gets 1/3 of blood money. And when we say of blood money, we mean of blood money of murdering someone. So there's a monetary exchange that takes place, and we call that blood money. So when he says 1/4 of blood money, meaning 1/4 of what you would pay for an individual. We study that in our fiqh classes. Kalam Jameel. He says, and then the second person gets 1/3 of blood money because, again, how they described it, he got suffocated over the rest. And the third gets half, okay, because one person fell upon him and he fell upon another. And the fourth gets a complete diya of blood money, since no one suffocated him, nor was he technically involved in anything, except for he might have been by accident a cause for that third person to die. Kalam Jameel. Now, who's going to pay the blood money? There was another individual that supposedly he instigated the whole idea, whether it's take the animal, etc., or let's go play with the lion, etc. There's debates upon that detail. This incident was presented to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he agreed with it. So what do we have here? We have a Sahabi performing his own ijtihad during the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam approves it. Now you have to read the exact details of the story so you can get exactly the verdicts and how the scenario went on. That's not the point of us today, right? What's the point? The point is for us to understand what was fiqh like for people other than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another famous incident is where Ammar ibn Yasir radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, I became in a state of impurity and I didn't touch the water. Now, this could mean that he couldn't find water, as in some of the narrations suggest, while others suggest that he didn't have enough. Some suggested that the weather wouldn't allow him to do so. He says, so I rolled around in the dirt and then I prayed. Then I mentioned this to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam hit the ground and said, this was enough. He didn't tell him to make up his salah. So we see that the prayer is correct. He just may be a little bit too extreme to what the idea of using the dirt for purification. So we see here the Prophet ﷺ is not rejecting the ijtihad, but slightly modifying it. Again, he could have said to him, why would you do that? Why didn't you just come and ask me? What do we have here? We have the Prophet ﷺ actually allowing and agreeing for there to be ijtihad. And think about this one last example. Money is present with the Prophet. The Prophet is handing it out. Everyone got some. A man walks in and says, I need help. I'm going through X, Y, and Z, and I have nothing. By this moment, the Prophet ﷺ does not have money to give him. And he's sitting, waiting for someone maybe to step in and help with their own money. Any money that came to the Prophet ﷺ is now already gone. A man gets up and he takes some of his money that he had just received from the Prophet, he takes a little bit of it and he puts it in front of the Prophet. Then another man comes and does the same, and then another one does the same. So everyone who had already gotten money is now giving back just a small little amount. So collectively can be given to this other person that needs money. The Prophet ﷺ responds and he says, Man sanna fil islami sunnatan hasana. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole sunnah bid'ah issue right now, but I will say right here, this is ijtihad from an individual, something that was never done before. This ijtihad was so good to the point where the Prophet ﷺ calls it a sunnah. So ijtihad is real. Ijtihad is present. And there's many, many other examples of the Sahaba doing so, but we need to move on from this stage. We need to get into the next stage, the stage of our khulafa, the four guided Khalifas of Islam that led the Ummah after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Umar ibn al-Khattab al-Faruq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Uthman Dhun Nurayn, who married two of the Prophet ﷺ's daughters. One passed away, then he married another one. And Ali radiyallahu anhu, Amir al-Mu'mineen, karramallahu wajhahu, as many of the early scholars used to say. And radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. These four leaders of the Ummah set examples in so many different aspects. Politically, militarily, but more for what we are discussing is fiqh. Abu Bakr actually wrote down rules and standards, and this was sent to his leaders around Muslim lands. Umar did the same, to the point where we literally have something called the pages of Abu Bakr, the book of Umar, the book of Uthman, the letters of Ali. These things, what was in these books, it wasn't a secret Quran like some groups say. It wasn't this magical statement. No, it was actually fiqh. It was all fiqh. Now, for the most part, it was a simplified version of what's in the Quran and Sunnah, kind of similar to what the fuqaha have written for us in the small little books for us to memorize, right? Similar, mostly pertaining to what a judge back then would need, blood money issues, punishments for certain crimes, things like that. Some of them had to do with dividing up inheritance. And some of them would have slight phrases of how to rule and how to judge. For example, Umar writes to one of his leaders, Shuraih, and in this message of Umar, it says as follows: if you find your answer in Allah's book, then you rule by it and don't listen or focus on anything else. So this here we have the first actual statement saying that your source for legal verdicts comes from what? The Quran. This is very important because later on when issues happen and what we might perceive as opposing ideas or verdicts or answers, we need to have an order, a sequence in which we know what takes power over what. There needs to be a system in place. Now, this is developed later on, but we'll get to that later on, inshallah. He tells him, and if you cannot find it in the book of Allah, then find it in the Sunnah. And if you find it in the Sunnah, then you follow it and do not listen to anything else. Okay, the brother that's with us is leaving. He's my son, by the way. All right, Habib, go ahead. Afwan. My son was attending, but it's getting too late. Wait. So Umar says, if you find it in the Sunnah, follow it and do not follow anything else. Perfect. As a matter of fact, this actually solves a lot of issues because there is this assumption out there that there's no such thing as a Sunnah. A lot of people don't know and don't recognize that the Quran actually came to us, traveled to us via Sunnah, via the same chains that we have in the Sunnah. So to come and say there's no Sunnah is almost equivalent to saying there's no Quran. But we do have the Sahaba very early on recognizing that there is something called a Sunnah. Abu Bakr was asked a question. He said, I'm not sure. I've never heard this before. A woman got up and she said, what? I heard the Prophet ﷺ say such and such. He said, that's it. There's your answer. Okay. Umar then says something else, something very important. What does he say? He says, now, if you do not find it in the Sunnah, then follow what the people have agreed to. This is what we call, in our modern day terminology, ijma', consensus. Very important. Now we're learning that there's a third source of religious or legal verdicts. It's called consensus. Now, consensus, just so you can understand, and we'll get to this in further detail later on as well, but in general, consensus is two types, right? There's consensus that is set in stone, that is built upon direct verses. It's not really something that's understood. It's something that is clearly evident in the text. It's just that the texts themselves didn't necessarily say it. And then usulis, scholars of usul, meaning those scholars that sit back and try to understand the general rulings that govern all religious verdicts, they'll argue, would that be considered part of the original verdicts or not? But we'll push that aside for a second. So this type of ijma' will be something like, you need to be upon purification, upon tahara, in order to pray. This is ijma'. This is ijma'. This type of ijma' is what the scholars mean when they say if you reject ijma', you're a kafir. Why do they say this? This is a really harsh statement, but they're talking about this type of ijma. The ijma that is so clear cut and evident, really, arguing against it, would be insanity. Okay. There's another type of ijma. It's more of an indirect ijma. It's an ijma that comes via an understanding of verses. Those that reject this or have an issue with this are not necessarily called disbelievers or anything like that. However, it is suspect why someone would have an issue if the majority, if not all the scholars have agreed to it. At times, some people will argue if when this ijma was developed, there were objecting voices. If that's the case, then that would nullify us even calling it ijma. Cases like this are very minor to begin with, but that's something that you would study in usul al-fiqh and in fiqh itself. So right there you have Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu giving this. But did he stop there? He didn't. He actually said, now, if there's nothing where no one has said anything, there's no Quran on the matter, there's no Sunnah on the matter, there's no Ijma on the matter. If you want, and we understand by if you want, meaning if you can, because it's not a want situation, really. He says, basically, if you can, or if you want to do ijtihad and develop your own opinion, then do so. He said, but if you want to wait for someone else to speak on the matter, then I truly and with all honesty view you abstaining and withholding better until someone else speaks. Now he sent this to one of his judges. Shuraiha is not an average person. This is a judge. This is a faqih already. But you see this caution. Why is there caution? Well, what are we doing? What are we speaking about today? What is our topic? It is religious verdicts, legal verdicts of the Sharia. This means Ibn al-Qayyim, he underestimated the position. How so? He named his book I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, those who are signing off on behalf of Allah. That's an underestimation. I mean, it's a beautiful title, don't get me wrong, and it's a good point. Jazahullah khair. But it's a little bit of an underestimation. You're not signing off on behalf of Allah. You are claiming that this is what Allah meant by his ahkam. This is a very severe situation. This is why the ulama were very cautious and wary about such situations. This is why letting someone else speak is actually better, even if you know the answer. But let's just say that you develop the answer, or the situation is so complex that maybe you should just not say it. Let an actual scholar deal with the situation. Is probably better. As a matter of fact, I will be frank that if the ummah in its entirety maintained this attitude that Umar is presenting, that the ulama, all of the ulama of Islam upheld, if we as individual Muslims upheld this sacredness and caution, our cautionary behavior and attitude to religious verdicts, we wouldn't have a lot of problems that we have today. The problem is we have TV hosts that speak about religion that ought to be imprisoned for the things that they say. Which brings me to an important point. If you are a student of knowledge or planning on becoming a student of knowledge, and you are having a discussion, or you're looking into a matter, or you're hearing even a debate, usually when someone is trying to prove a point and they know they're upon falsehood, they never give you the full story. Rather, they'll quote 1,000 references without actually giving you what is in those references. I remember maybe 6, 7 months ago, someone brought to my attention, I think it was my father-in-law, that Ibrahim Isa, a famous TV host in Egypt, was saying that the ulama of Islam have stated clearly that Isra and Mi'raj was only in a dream. I said, interesting. Did he mention references? Since Ibrahim Isa is literally nothing but an Egyptian TV host, really, you're not going to go far with that, right? So he says, yes. He quotes Al-Imam al-Maraghi, a Hanafi scholar of Egypt. Now, I'm going to be honest, before even looking at Maraghi's books, I think we can all, right off the back, without even knowing him, he was a major Hanafi scholar. That alone should tell you he probably did not make those claims. Probably more than likely, he did not. But I told my father-in-law, you know something? I'll tell you like I tell all the brothers that I discuss matters with or we study together. Let's open the source and take a look for ourselves. Okay? We open up the book and literally Al-Imam al-Maraghi is saying, and some people claim the following. Next sentence, that it only happened in a dream. Then he says, also some people claimed, also some people claimed, also some people claimed. On the following page, he starts refuting each one. The guy reads the point and he even shows it on TV without actually showing the full page. So he's lying. Or he can't read. Either or horrible. As a student of knowledge, your first principle, your first rule, if this is something that for the first time you want to get into, we read the fine print of everything. We're going to see it from beginning to end. No cropping, no splitting, no hiding. No, we'll go to the source and we'll read it ourselves. You have a claim, hayyakumullah, or welcome. Because if he's a kafir, then no hayyakumullah really. We'll use welcome, right? Show me your sources. Come back to me in a week. Let me check these sources myself and actually read through them. Nothing secondary, all primary. If I can get my hands on a manuscript, I'll do it. If I can't read it myself, I'll ask someone to give me that slide from the manuscript. Let me see it myself. You need to be worried, even about books that are printed and published. There are certain published houses that are more reliable than others, obviously. But you need to be cautious because a lot of time it's just sloppy work. And other times there's deliberate changes. Deliberate changes that take place. If you look in the manuscript, can't be found. Someone literally changed it and they did it on purpose. As a student of knowledge, you catch that before everyone else. Why? Because if it's grammar, you caught it. If it's a misprint, you've read it, so you know that there's a problem. If it's a tampering, well, you've seen the manuscript. You've analyzed it. We don't rush to anything. We are cautious. We're wary. We think about what is being asked of us. Someone's asking a question on wudu, and you know the answer. You don't jump out with it. Take a deep breath. You do some dhikr before you answer. Oh, but it's a simple question. Yeah, your simple question could have an extra letter that indicates a different understanding and meaning, right? Now, would you prefer to wait for Judgment Day where Allah asks you, well, why were you hasty with my laws? Or would you rather take a minute, say some dhikr, gain some ajr, and prepare yourself to respond correctly? Okay, I think you know the answer. Now, the Sahaba, as I said, they continue to write papers and books and letters and notes that had different ahkam. A lot of times, these were written out of requests from their different leaders and governors in different areas. And this continued throughout the lifetime of the Sahaba. And they're even debating matters. They're arguing masail. They are presenting different discussions, different approaches, different systems. The Sahaba themselves differed with one another. Now, this is a sensitive topic for many people, but we have to touch base on it if we're speaking about the history. And we'll be ending our class today with the differences of the Sahaba. In our next class, we'll end the discussion of the history of the Tabi'een and the Tabi'een and begin with our school, which is the Shafi'i school. And we're going to go into an intensive discussion about this. We're going to be speaking about furu', detailed verdict. We're going to be speaking about usul, the fundamentals of our thought process throughout the school. We're going to be speaking about qawa'id fiqhiyya. We're going to speak about the Hanafi approach of istihsan and the Maliki approaches of things like amal ahl al-Madina and an-nadariyat al-fiqhiyya. These are theoretical fiqh concepts. What's the Shafi'i stance on this? We're going to be speaking about Sadd al-Dhara'i' that the Hanabila uphold. We'll be speaking about issues in hadith like the Mursal. We'll be speaking about Arabic. And we'll also be speaking about the creed of the Shafi'i scholars, starting with Imam Shafi'i himself. What did he actually believe? What is all the commotion that's going on? Why did Ibn Salah say that mantiq is haram? Was he speaking about all logic or a certain type of logic? What is the creed of the Shafi'iyya? And who speaks for the Shafi'iyya? All this are things that we're going to be speaking about. But know, as rule of thumb, when you're speaking about any fiqh school, it's not for everyone. If you open up history books, you'll see thousands of scholars. Not all of them have a say in the school. The school is a collective effort of many different scholars. We don't follow Imam al-Shafi'i because we like Imam al-Shafi'i. Yes, we do taqleed, but our taqleed is to an entire body of scholars, not a scholar. Okay? But let me end you with the ending topic of this evening, and that is debates and issues that the Sahaba themselves have had. For example, how do you split and divide battle booty? So your gains after a war. What do you do with them? How do you divide it? Abu Bakr had an approach. Umar had an approach. Kalam Jamil. So for example, before Umar, these countries and what we've gained at the end of the battle was divided amongst the Muslims. Warriors first, of course, and then divided accordingly, according to the rules of al-Khumus. When certain countries became part of the Muslim Ummah, Umar did not do that with what we've gained after conquering these lands. Okay, we're only speaking about that which is conquered. Those that became Muslim, their lands are not conquered. They're our brothers. But lands that we've conquered, Umar stopped splitting up the booty. Instead, he said it should stay there to help the local economy. This was ijtihad from Umar. Why? Because the ummah now is spread thin. It would make sense to, instead of sending the money back home to the capital, maybe we should keep it there in that region so we can help the local economy stand on its legs. Some of the Sahaba agreed, such as Ali, Uthman, Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Others were very disappointed of this idea, especially if they were warriors or those who had maybe training camps that sent out warriors. Well, this would affect maybe certain businesses and projects that were in place. From them were like Ammar ibn Yasir, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, even Bilal, who said that the Khumus rules, breaking everything down into 5 parts, is mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah, so should be maintained accordingly. Umar did not deny that this is the case. He simply said that the benefit of that moment would be like, in order to do that, we're going to waste a lot of manpower, and we might leave a part of the lands of the Muslims empty. Now, the fuqaha argued that this makes sense or not. Abu Yusuf al-Qadi actually writes a paper on this exact incident, and he says Umar actually did the right thing. You see, sending it back to the capital is not part of the process. It's using it for the Muslims is the process. Now, the means by dividing it up into 5 segments could still work on a local basis. I mean, he did leave it for the locals, and many Muslims became locals in those territories who were part of the army, part of the soldiers that got a portion of that wealth. They kept it by staying in those places. So technically, Umar, really, he still kept the rule somewhat. He just simply saw that, well, let's keep it over there instead of sending it to the capital. Now, we might argue that he should have send it back to the capital, but if you look at the logistics, and let me just a little bit of military jargon. I'm not a military person in any way, shape, or form, but I do stay up to date with different things, events around the world, as a Muslim ought to. And you know, I heard military experts one time say that military professionals, they don't look at the weapon aspect as much as they look at logistics. So if we were to think in military terms and look at the logistics of the issue, where was the capital? What lands are we talking about? A lot of it was either in parts of Asia, parts of northern Iraq, parts in Africa. Logistics-wise, that's a lot. It's a lot to consider. It's a lot to think about. It might not even be worth it at the end. But keeping it local, I mean, don't forget, zakah and humus is part of the zakah process, is for local economy. Well, if the local grows too far, can we move it? Now, we already, many of the fuqaha, not everyone, but many of them actually state that zakat should not be moved from the local place that it became an obligation in. Why wouldn't we apply this to the humus, right? Now, of course, with globalization and the spread of Muslims across the lands, our hearts and pockets should be with our Muslim brothers, whether they're in Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, Australia, regardless, right? But at the same time, we can't forget the original rule, which is local economy. You can't have in your community brothers starving and you're sending your zakah money overseas to Muslims in need. While they both are in need, your responsibility is to your locals before those. You could split it, right? You can split it if a community were to split it. Sadly, most communities now are stuck in the community debt, as I like to call it, because of big and fancy masajid. That needs to be addressed on another day. So as you can see, that's an example of the Sahaba having a khilaf. The khilaf was very vocal. No one was shy about it. So no one would ever get away with saying something that others might feel goes against the Quran and Sunnah, and everyone's silent. That would never happen. That could not happen because the Sahaba were very vocal. Another example was that before Umar, okay, when someone was caught drinking alcohol, they were hit with whatever, okay? There was no had for this. It's just simply a punishment. Karam Jameel. During the time of Umar, remember, during the time of Abu Bakr, there were a lot of battles going on. Not a lot of local restrictions or conservative police, if you may, in any way, shape, or form that might be, whether it's just scholars educating or actual police. So all of a sudden, people started to drink. Okay, normally, our military, our strength is in other cities, towns, and countries at war still, and people are trying to get away with things. So what Umar does is, this is like halfway during his leadership, some say it was half, some say it was in the early stages, that he said, no, I'm actually going to start giving out lashes. Now, some say, like Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, I wouldn't necessarily do this, but I see the point. He has another famous statement about this very thing. He says, ما كنت لأقيم حدا على أحد فيموت وأجد في نفسي منه شيئا إلا صاحب الخمر. And this shows you that there was there was a problem now with people drinking. Ali ibn Abi Talib is saying, I feel so bad when I have to perform a had, and the had is not death. No, it's more of lashes and things like that. And the person dies. It breaks my heart, and I don't know what to do, and it's sad. He said, except for one type of person, someone who is drinking alcohol. Now, think about that for a moment. There is a problem. And the problem is so bad that Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu is saying, I don't feel bad. Whatever happens to that person that's drinking alcohol. This tells you, Ali doesn't speak this way. Okay, Umar might at times express himself that way because he speaks with strength and might. Ali doesn't speak that way. Ali is more calm. Okay, just different personalities. That's just not how Ali speaks. For Ali to say this is odd. This is like you tell me that Abu Bakr says this, or Uthman said this. It's odd. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu would say this because he's a man of might and power. When he says it, people would stop drinking that day, okay, out of fear of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. When Abu Bakr said he was going to go to war against the people that were not paying zakah, the Sahaba were in shock. Abu Bakr is not the kind of person to say, let's go to war. Not saying that he's not brave enough. No, nothing like that. But rather, he's more of a calm personality. Let's think about it a little bit more. For him to get to the point to say, let's go to war, you need to understand. If you're understanding who these personalities are, there's a major problem. That's why he's going to that extreme. Okay, and it was a good extreme. Obviously, it was a good choice. But so, did all of the Sahaba agree with this? No. Anas did not agree with this, and many other Sahaba did not agree with this. Now, Umar did try and gather the Sahaba and get some more of a consensus going, but many of the Sahaba did not like it, while a lot more did, like this proactive approach of Umar to stop people from drinking. Another issue was the issue of riba al-fadl. Okay, now we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade riba, but what type of riba? Riba al-fadl, was it considered part of the riba that was haram? Ibn Abbas said no, it was only riba al-nasi'ah. And leave it till our Shafi'i fiqh things, and I'll explain all of these terms. Regardless of their different definitions, our focus right now should be on the concepts only. So Ibn Abbas said the riba that's haram is riba al-nasi'ah, and riba al-fadl is allowed. It's not haram. Usama ibn Zayd agreed with him. Ibn Zubayr agreed with him. Okay? Tamam? All of the other Sahaba said no. Even riba al-fadl is considered haram. Kalam Jameel. Not only that, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri presented a hadith proving that. Kalam Jameel. Some say that that he only mentioned the hadith after they mentioned it, or he was far away, and there's discussion, debate on how the debate ended. But that's beyond the point. The point right now that we're just trying to see is simply what? That there was khilaf, because the existence of a debate between them proves the existence of a fiqh process. Now, we'll have to analyze this a bit more, and we'll get to that when we speak about the usul schools within the 4 schools of fiqh, because there's only 2, and we'll get to that, inshallah ta'ala. The issue of the talaq. Now, if you're aware of the whole Salafi, Wahhabi versus the Asha'ira issues and Ibn Taymiyyah and all of that fun history, which I'm not getting into now, but you'll know that among one of the problems was the issue of the 3 talaq. What is the 3 talaq? The 3 talaq is that saying that all 3 in one setting, versus that all 3 would still be one since it is one setting. Now, the first opinion, which realistically is the opinion of the majority, is that saying three in one setting is three. However, Ibn Abbas argues and says no. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr, it was only one. Many argued that a lot of the duration of Ibn Abbas's lifetime with the Prophet ﷺ, he was young. He didn't witness this. So someone else is telling him, and that was the argument back then. Well, what about during the time of Abu Bakr? Some argued that maybe he's assuming it. Maybe only when he heard about the actual verdict, he said, wait a minute, are you now changing things? All of the other Sahaba said three in one setting is three, except for Ibn Abbas. Kalam Jameel. Now, Ibn Abbas was not alone. Okay? He wasn't. Abu Musa said something similar, not the same thing. Keep in mind, he did not say the same thing as Ibn Abbas. He actually gave a whole different breakdown, meaning that this had to do with if the marriage was consummated or not. Well, that changes what Abu Musa was saying altogether, right? A lot of people, remember what I told you, a lot of people will name names, name verdicts, name sources, but actually never go back and read what was said. Abdurrahman ibn Auf also argued, and he said that the only time three was for one was if they moved in and they were with each other, but they didn't consummate. This is exactly how he worded it. But if he consummated it, the three is three. Kalam Jami. It's a little bit different than what Abu Musa said, but we're sticking to their exact wording so we can see, because the scholars did consider them two separate approaches because of the wording of the opinion. So realistically, even though there's differing than what everyone else is saying, it's not really in agreement with what Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu is claiming. Again, that's beyond the point. The fact of the matter is that there is ijtihad. Ijtihad is allowed. There are processes. This is a thing. Because these incidences, these details that we're seeing in this history, right? Whether it's their statements, whether it's their books and letters, whether it's what they did during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, it all comes back to where do the four schools get legitimacy to even have an opinion? Back to the Sahaba. For indeed, the four schools are the conclusion of the Salaf. Now, there's other masail too. There was issues of Taraweeh. Because, of course, you have the famous issue. Is Taraweeh 11 rak'ah? Or is it more? How many is it? So you have the famous statement of Aisha. It almost looks like Aisha is saying something else, even though there's pretty much consensus that she was talking about witr and not Taraweeh, but that's okay. We're mentioning it nevertheless. There's the issue of talaq between someone who is a slave and someone who is free. There's verdicts, there's issues, and there was debates. There's issues on the ba'ina, meaning the one that cannot go back to her husband. That's it. Divorce has ended. Who pays for her housing if her parents are not alive and there's no home for her to go to? There's issues in inheritance that they debated on and discussed. There's issues on how to give a fatwa. And then, of course, there's another element to this history that has to do with those who are able to give ijtihad. Are they all the same? Why are we recognizing Ibn Abbas's statements to begin with? I thought we said he was young. Well, Ibn Abbas is a scholar. He's actually from the fuqaha of the Sahaba. Who are the fuqaha of the Sahaba? The fuqaha of the Sahaba start with Umar ibn al-Khattab. He is actually considered the first faqih in the ummah. Now, there's fiqh existed before he was in leadership. However, analyzing and presenting a system to look over the evidence and how to implement the evidence really started to appear during the lifetime of Umar. You might be wondering why. What about Abu Bakr? Don't forget, when the Prophet ﷺ died, there was chaos. Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was busy. Okay, we already saw as soon as Umar came in, there was many problems in many different communities and neighborhoods, like people drinking, right? And that is a result of being in war and chaos. Then next in line, and when we say next in line, we really just mean in the quantity of that which we have from that individual. And some argued between these two. Next one is Sayyidina Ali, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa karram Allahu wajha. Some argued, no, Ali has more documented fiqh than Umar. There's debates there. Yes, there's of course the Shia element and what exactly of what they're claiming is authentic and what is not, of course, is brought to the table. But really, at the end of the day, a lot of what they claim is really just swept to the side because you can't prove it. There's no ilm rijal until hundreds of years later amongst their books, and they developed their own system of authentication that really, let's end the night on a positive term, right? Next, we have Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, which we will come to see is actually the forefather of the Hanafi school. We have al-Mu'mineen, Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha. We have Zayd ibn Thabit. We have Abdullah ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Umar, which Abdullah ibn Umar and somewhat Ibn Abbas are technically them, along with Ali ibn Abi Talib, the forefathers, and somewhat Umar too, of the Maliki school. Okay, we can't say that there's a forefather for the Shafi'is or the Hanbalis, because the Shafi'is looked at them collectively, not individually. And that was a change in the process, which we'll get to, inshallah ta'ala. Next level of minor fuqaha, and again, we're only measuring their fiqh by the literature or what was been documented from them or narrated by them, right? Not in its entirety. We're not saying that one is better than the other. But next would be people like Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Salama, Uthman ibn Affan, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. And you can understand Abu Bakr being in warfare, Uthman living through a dilemma, being murdered. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant the individuals involved that which they deserve. They were the beginning of endless fitan in our ummah to this very moment. This very exact moment. May Allah handle them with how He sees fit for the chaos that they brought upon us. They killed al-Shaheed, Dhil Nurayn. SubhanAllah. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri is next. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Sure, some might argue he'll be the forefather of the Ash'a'ira, but he's really just a great-grandfather. Tamam. You have Jabir ibn Abdullah, Mu'adh ibn Jabal. And you might say, well, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, I mean, the story is famous. Once he got to Yemen, his student, Amr ibn Maymun, he started to document a lot of things. He just stops all of a sudden, and he doesn't continue to transmit and mention everything. No one's really certain why, but in Yemen at the time, writing was not really popular just yet, so that could be why. One man carrying all of that by himself might have been a little bit problematic. And Mu'adh does quote things himself. Sahaba do visit him. He comes back to visit, but he comes, his first journey back, though, was after the Prophet ﷺ had died. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he's a medium level faqih of the Sahaba, and the only reason why is that he was a scribe. He wrote. He's actually one of the revivers of writing. As you know, in the earlier days of the Prophet ﷺ, he forbid anyone from writing. Why? Because they could barely write. So all of their efforts went into writing the Quran, right? Writing was not popular yet amongst the Arabs. So those that could write are older and confusion might happen. By the time we start seeing Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Anas ibn Malik, once we see these younger Sahaba come to the scene and have studied already and they've learned how to read and write, this is new. This is a new reality in the Arabian existence. Youngsters, and I don't mean that in disrespect to the Sahaba, of course, no, obviously not. But the younger generation is what is writing. This is changing everything because now there will be documented intellectuals. There were intellectuals, but it wasn't always documented. Now the face of Arabia has officially changed. They start writing. The elders say to Abdullah ibn Amr, stop writing. He says, why? I know what's Quran. I know what's Sunnah. They say, no, stop writing. He's like, so I put my pen down. I'm not going to write. Then I go to the Prophet ﷺ and I say, what happened? The Prophet ﷺ smiles and says, write everything that you hear, for indeed you will only hear the truth. His statement alone tells us there has been an actual culture change. And Islam, because it is the religion of balance, automatically is recognizing, right? It makes perfect sense. And it shows you. Now, the writing started, the writing was always there. The writing automatically, from that moment, became official. And everyone wrote, starting with the young generations. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So he was a scribe. He was focused more on documentation than speaking. That's why you actually will only find very minor things. Now, because he was a scribe, there's a famous situation with Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, because once he picked up writing, he wrote everything. And when we say everything, we mean everything. And it got him into a little problem, right? Where he also wrote down previous books and other people's texts. So if the tabi'een that are taking from Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As are not scholars, you'll see the scholars being a little bit cautious. They want to verify the information, because if they're not a scholar, they might make a mistake and say, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're actually quoting Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As saying something that was in the Bible. You get the problem? That's why the scholars were very cautious on who was narrating from Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. Not because he was making a mistake, but because those writing sometimes made mistakes. And they found like a handful of things, but because the one listening was not actually a scholar. They weren't even studying. They just heard stuff and they wrote it. And they made a mistake. And they said, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even though other students of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As who were scholars, they never said Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No, they mentioned a rabbi or a priest that said something. Okay. But the scholars seen it, the famous story that when Harun al-Rashid was, he found, or someone was brought to him who was fabricating a hadith. He was a zindiq, hiding out amongst the Muslims. So he told Harun al-Rashid, you can't kill me. Harun said, why? He said, oh, I put in so many fake hadith, you can't even find it. He said, how do you think we found you? See? Brother Saif, if we could, I'll mute that. So how do you think we found you? They'd already found out those hadith. The scholars weren't sleeping. Didn't happen while the scholars were asleep. They knew, they saw what was happening. Kalam Jameel. So the man said, no, there's more. So Harun said, yeah, we already know that there's more, because we already started finding those more that you made. Because remember, scholars didn't memorize a hadith because of what the text says, but rather text and chain. So if someone brought a text with a chain that has not been already documented, that was a red flag. That never happened. So if it did happen, there was a complete police force that was dedicated to hunting the people down that did this. It wasn't a joke. And the scholars and the Muslims were very, very alert of these incidences. Okay. And that's why you'll see many ahadith that might exist that look like they're sound, but they're in the collections of fabrications, where the scholars neglect them. Why? Because they're not authentic, because there's a defect in them. And we'll speak about that, inshallah ta'ala, when we speak about different adillah. Other scholars of the Sahaba that might be a little bit less are like Abu Darda, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, but he died in a plague somewhat early on, so that makes sense that he would have only a few things. And Nu'man ibn al-Bashir, who was more of a zahid, he kept himself very low-key, focused on ibadah more than anything else, similar to Abu Darda, really. So it would make sense. They won't be involved in a lot of fiqh discussions. Abu Talha, a little bit as well, not a whole lot. Abu Dharr has also small involvement in fiqh. Hafsa has a little bit as well, being one of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. And that, in short, we've pretty much covered the reality of fiqh amongst the Sahaba. Obviously, we are summarizing. The purpose of this course is Shafi'i fiqh, but this is the entry in order to get to the moment a Shafi'i comes to the scene. What did the scene look like? Up until this point, in our next class, we're going to start with at-tabi'in. Now we see that the Sahaba are speaking on matters of fiqh. They have agreements, they have disagreements. There's individuals that are prominent figures in the realm of fiqh, and there's ones that have minor participation. We see Ibn Abbas is a critic, not of Umar, as a lot of people will claim, but rather of any opinion until he can verify. Of course, we know the famous stories of nikah al-mut'a and all these different things, kalam jameel, but there's debates. They are present. We're not saying which side is better than the other. That's not the point of our discussion. Our point is fiqh is alive. It is active. It is part of their lives. And we're going to see this translate into the next generation in our next session, inshallah ta'ala. Before I let you go, though, many people will come out these days and they'll say, oh, but there's an opinion for this Sahabi, so we're going to utilize it today. That's not how it works. Remember what I said. We don't follow individuals. Yes, Ibn Mas'ud might be the forefather of the Hanafi school, but they do not blind follow what Ibn Mas'ud said. Wait a minute. Am I saying blind follow and speaking about the Sahaba? Yes, they're human. They are human. That means the evidences must be examined first. People that will point to these random opinions throughout history, whether it belongs to Sahaba or Tabi'in or someone else, in a setting that seems more like politically motivated, these people are trying to water down our deen. This is why the fuqaha said, those who seek the excuses of the fuqaha have indeed made zandaqa, meaning are performing an act that would make them depart from Islam. Jameel. Now, we're not saying they are kuffar, but indeed, this type of behavior is disgusting. Why would you do that? If the ummah is united and the scholars have already addressed these issues, 1,000-year-old opinion, 1,200-year-old opinion, 1,300-year-old opinion, and it has already been analyzed and discussed and pushed aside, and the ijma' has settled on one opinion or another, or on two opinions or three opinions. Why are you mentioning this other opinion? Is it to support your own ideology, propaganda? What is the purpose? And you go and look at these individuals, like Sa'd al-Din al-Hilali in Egypt. I mention Egypt a lot. I grew up there, so I'm more familiar with the culture and names being passed around on a regular basis. Kind of like an American would be familiar with someone like Tom Brady, who I just kind of find out who that was like a year ago. I think it was baseball? No, football. There you go. Kalam Jameel. So this individual, there'll be some commotion on a mas'ala. He'll come out on national TV. He's a fiqh teacher in Azhar. And what he'll do is he'll come say, well, you can do this and this because, this individual said it was okay. Well, yeah, that doesn't mean it is. I could right now present you a major faqih that came and said if there's too many people on Jabal Arafat, when people are making Hajj, they're standing on the mount. I can bring you a prominent Shafi'i faqih that said, why don't we start breaking it down and spreading it out? Of course, the fuqaha said, what is wrong with you? Why would you even say that? Now, any Muslim hears this and thinks about it for a moment will get emotional. Like, what? What is he saying? Obviously, this was an ijtihad that went haywire, a bad idea. But we're not going to go and repeat it. We're not going to come and say, oh, this is a great idea to handle the too many people in Hajj. No, this is a horrible idea. Horrible idea. No, we're not even going to repeat it. We're definitely not going to say it's part of the Shafi'i school, ever. It reminds me of another opinion by one of our earlier Shafi'i scholars that said, if you make intention to fast tomorrow for Ramadan and then you have a snack, you have to repeat your intention. He said, what are you talking about? I mean, the fuqaha told that scholar, if he does not retract that statement, they're going to request an istitaba. This means where the police come and arrest him, take him to jail, and say, you need to make tawbah or we're going to apply a severe punishment. Why did they do that? Because, well, first of all, no one ever said that. Second of all, it's an insane idea. Third of all, why are you even promoting that? Why are you saying that amongst the people and causing fitna and causing hardship and causing confusion? That's not from Islam. And Abu Sahl al-Sa'luqi really did. He threatened Abu Zayd al-Marwazi that he would, no, was it Abu Zayd? Yeah, I believe it was Abu Zayd al-Marwazi. He told him, if you don't take this back, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put in and request an istitaba. Imam al-Haramain, he mentions that Abu Sahl al-Sa'luqi, they're all scholars from the Shafi'i school. He was not having this. No, not acceptable. And that's what the fuqaha did. I mean, someone presented an odd idea, then this is looked at almost as in a criminal behavior. And which brings me to my closing point of the night. If you're a Shafi'i in a Hanafi neighborhood, don't go around preaching that your opinions are sound and theirs are not. For I will be honest, if I was asked my opinion, I'll be on the sides of the Ahnaf because you're causing fitna. And it works the other way as well. If you're a Hanafi in a Shafi'i community, I mentioned Hanafi and Shafi'i because they've, in the fiqh realms, as you'll see, we're not belittling the status of the Malikis and the Hanabila, but in true fiqh debate, it's always in between the Shafi'is and the Hanafis. While the Malikis and the Hanbalis had much participation as well, the fierce fiqh debates has been in between the Shafi'is and the Hanafis. That's why I'm mentioning them. That's all. But there's khilafat elsewhere as well. But if you are Hanafi in the Shafi'i community, don't go around saying the Hanafi's opinion is supreme and that other opinion is wrong. Same thing if you're in a Maliki environment and you're Shafi'i. If you're afraid that, putting your hands on your chest might make you feel out of place, Imam Shafi'i says you can put your hand to the sides as long as you're not playing with your hands. That's fine. Kalam Jameel. And if you're studying Shafi'i fiqh, then you're very familiar with the concept of al-khuruj min al-khilaf. If there's debate and it's all ijtihad matters, then we'll implement what the other ijtihad says if we're there in their environment in order not to cause fitna amongst the Muslims. Because remember, that's not the purpose. If what you're saying or believing might cause a fitna, double check with what you're arguing about before going vocal, because there might be a way around it to avoid fitna between our brothers and sisters. That's not the goal. We are discussing scholarly matters. You are to act as such and behave as such and keep these discussions in those circles. That is how you grow. That's how you elevate yourself. Here we're going to end our discussion for tonight. I'd like to thank everyone for being present with us tonight. Jazakumullah khair. And Jazakumullah khair for having patience, listening through all of the details. I know it's a lot at times. We'll continue in our next class. Any questions or discussions, I would recommend, just so we don't prolong the session, to present them in our Telegram group. If in our next session you would like to have them during the session, or meaning after the session is completed, but before ending and shutting the recording, we can do that as well. But I recommend in our first session, let's go ahead, write all your questions over there. You can also do audio if you want. I can respond in written and audio, just depending on my first and earliest opportunities, inshallah. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وإياكم يا إخوان.